off first, so we may as well make a start. Welcome to everybody who's here this evening. I'd like to welcome members that are actually here. I'd also like to welcome Councillor Clark, who's attending as an observer this evening. He will be hopefully ratified as a member of the committee at the next full council, but has come to observe this evening. And welcome to those that are joining us remotely, especially welcome to Elizabeth, who is joining us as our new interim monitoring officer this evening. You're very welcome. Hope to meet you in person at some point. So thank you all for your attendance. Okay, moving on to the agenda. I think everybody's familiar with the emergency evacuation procedure. I think we've all been in this room before, so hopefully everybody knows what we're supposed to do. Apologies for absence. Do we have any apologies for absence?
Yes, we've had apologies from Councillor Delaney and John Mackenzie as substitution.
Thank you. Item 3, declarations of interest. Do any members have declarations of interest that they'd like to raise at this point? No? Okay, thank you very much. Item 4, minutes of the meeting held on the 29th of November, which are on pages 3 to 6. Could we agree those as a true record unless members have any matters of accuracy that they want to raise? Okay, thank you. A second those from the chair. Councillor Graham? Thank you. We would take those by general affirmation. Everybody in favour? Thank you. Okay. Item 5. Minutes of the meeting of the Flood Management Working Party, which was held on the 9th of December, and those on pages 7 to 10 on your agenda. So there is a recommendation within the minutes of that working party, but obviously it's a matter that is on the agenda at a later stage with regards to the funding on Ryedale contributing to funding towards a new flood prevention scheme in Norton. So if there are no matters of accuracy that people want to raise on here, we'll just take those as noted and we will discuss that at a later stage in the agenda. Members are happy with that. Do you have any comments? Okay, thank you. So we'll note those. Item 6, minutes of the Livestock Market Working Party, which was held on the 19th of January, pages 11 to 14. I wasn't actually at that meeting. I don't think there were any decisions in the minutes that I'm aware of. Councillor Burr chaired it in my absence. Again, if there are any questions, please raise them now, or any matters of accuracy from that meeting that people want to mention. Councillor Duncan?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to ask, it states in here on page 13 that it was unanimously agreed that the livestock, the council could move on to the next stage of the project development subject to finalising the exclusivity agreement. It was also mentioned in here that it was unanimously agreed that as much of the project as possible should be conducted under Ryedale District Council, and also it was agreed to release funding agreed by the chair of P&R towards development work for the project. And I just wanted to ask, I don't know who's best placed to answer, which is how much money have we spent so far on consultancy work for the project, or how much money has been agreed for the project? And also I wanted to, I thought that's the first question, and I've got a second question after that.
Off the top of my head, Councillor Duncan, I couldn't give you a figure at this point. I'm happy to give you a figure after the meeting.
I don't know if the Section 151 officer has an answer on that.
Get used to this. Anton, do you have a figure, an up-to-date figure? Did you hear that?
Yes, I did. Just to reiterate, nothing's been spent, Anton, is what you said, yeah. The query I had is, obviously it mentions in here about funding being released, and that being within limits that the chairman of P&R could agree. And the concern I have is around this working party. Now, I don't know if the monitoring officer might want to just give a view, which is working parties cannot make decisions. It states in here several times it has been decided, or unanimously agreed that. What I would like to ask is, before any funding is agreed, that will be a decision taken by Policy and Resources Committee or by Council, because there is no budget that I am aware of, unless Anton can say otherwise, that we will be able to spend from, i.e. there's no budget that the chairman of P&R could agree, because we haven't agreed that as members up to this point.
So the only budget that's been agreed was the £1.5 million which was set aside in the capital plan last year. The motion for that wasn't particularly detailed. I think it said something like to add £1.5 million to the capital plan. There are, of course, other limits within the financial regulations. So when anything is going to cost above £50,000, for example, it needs to come to the committee for approval. The other budget that was agreed was back in July, I think, a P&R meeting agreed some additional capacity posts within economic development, one of which was particularly to look at this area, and that would be found from within existing resources. That's what came to P&R for this financial year, and would be added to the budget for next financial year. But those are the budgets that have been set aside at this stage.
Thanks for that, Anton. Obviously, it just states in here that looking to get approval by the end of January. I don't know if that's happened. Obviously, that time period has passed. It also mentions that the contract value for the next stage of the project is within the threshold, i.e. under 50. That seems to have been decided already. And obviously it states in here that it can be approved by the chair of P&R. I just feel that given that we've got this, and given that working parties are not decision-making bodies, it would have seemed sensible to me, politically and for officers as well, that a recommendation had come forward in these minutes right now, given nothing's happened since the meeting, for the committee to make a decision. That to me would seem to be the best way forward to ensure that officers had the political agreement from the council as to the next stage, so we could look through all the information and all the detail. So I would just like to ask, will this come to committee or council for agreement, as I think will be right and proper? I can't see any obvious budget that the chairman of P&R could agree to release funds from for consultancy work.
Yeah, I think perhaps we need to speak to ask if Philip's able to speak on this matter, because obviously you've been heavily involved in the livestock project. My comment would be that we are keen to move this project forward as quickly as possible, and so if we can make that an easier process, simpler process, without having to go through every committee cycle, otherwise we are going to have a lot of delays.
But when you say we, who do you mean by we? Because there's been two decisions taken by council. The first was in December 2019, which was we would look further at this project. That was what was decided. And the second decision was at the budget meeting last year, where we agreed to put into the capital programme 1.5 million for construction capital costs. We haven't made any decision as a council since that point at committee or council level to say that we actually want to appoint someone to do consultancy work, to appoint a line, to appoint them at a certain cost for a certain task. And I feel that while I understand you might want to skip steps of the process out, that is not necessarily the most democratic and transparent way to do it. And I'm saying for everyone's benefit, officers and us as councillors and you as chairman of this committee, the best thing to do would be to get clearance from committee or council to move to the next stage, and to actually have a plan as to what we want to do as a council. that we shouldn't be skipping stages out. There is no budget I can see to allow consultancy work to go ahead at this point in time.
I don't think I was actually suggesting we should be skipping any stages. And when I said we, I think I mean the livestock working party, because there is a will amongst that. And I think also the prioritisation exercise that we went through before Christmas showed that there was also a will amongst the council to move the livestock market project forward as quickly as possible. And we all know we have a limited tenure left as a council. So, but I'll ask Philip to comment as well, please, Philip.
Yeah, thanks very much for that, Chair. Yeah, my understanding is, as Anton's referred to, there is £1.5 million set aside in the budget to move the livestock market scheme forward. We were seeking consent through the working party to appoint consultants to the next stage of detailed design and costing work. When that's been completed, that will be brought back to committee to obviously make decisions on whether members wish to see the project proceed. We've not yet commissioned a line to actually get on with that work. That commission has not been commenced yet, pending confirmation of the exclusivity agreement. But certainly my understanding is that there is the budget set aside, and there is the ability for the chair of P&R to actually make a decision to progress to the next stage in more detailed design work within the kind of delegated thresholds and financial thresholds of the authority. Thank you.
Thank you, Philip. Okay. Councillor Docker?
Yeah, can I just say, it states quite a few times in here it was unanimous. I do believe that the last livestock working party, I raised concerns that actually the 150,000 was going to be spent in three amounts of under 50,000, so you could actually do it without it coming to committee. And regardless of my views on the livestock market, I feel very strongly about democracy and openness, and I think not allowing everybody to spend 150, it's slightly disingenuous doing it in three lumps, and I think it should come to committee, and it says unanimous. I was hesitant about it.
Councillor Bowe, I wasn't at the last meeting. Do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I thought the meeting was really positive. Everyone seemed behind it, seemed to agree. I think that the minutes are a true reflection, and I'm disappointed that if some members don't agree, they need to, note their objection and not just move forward with things, because we were trying to actually get a consensus of how we were going to actually move forward with this. And I would probably just suggest that any members who are on the working party and they don't agree, they need to actually say, I actually do not agree with this, because this is a true reflection of the minutes, and we did discuss all sorts of things, and obviously this is not in its entirety. However, if councillors, want to actually, put something in the sand to say, I totally and utterly disagree, then they need to have it minuted, don't they? Because, as I say, we're trying to get consensus, but obviously if councillors, when they come to another meeting, want to change their minds, then it would have been helpful if it was actually in the minutes. But I take the points, and they will be noted.
I did try and make the point. The meeting was, it was very difficult to do anything because you went through the agenda at a very quick rate. I felt if I did try to say anything, you wouldn't let me finish, or I think patronising is too strong a word, but I did feel that I didn't get the opportunity to say what I wanted to say.
Points noted. Thank you very much. I'm not going to get into a silly argument. Thank you. Points noted.
Thank you, Councillor Docker. Councillor Potter?
Yes, thank you, Chair. My recollection of the meeting was that Councillor Docker did indeed raise concerns about the amount of money that was going to be spent on consultants, but my recollection was that she asked the question whether that money would be spent in convenient chunks of less than £50,000 at a time, and our very experienced and very knowledgeable officer assured us that this was a one-off, and if that happens to not be the case, I'm sure we will look far more closely at that in the future, and that if that were the case, it would need to come back to committee. It was also my recollection that Councillor Docker had a very adequate time to speak and did so at quite some length. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Potter. Councillor Duncan?
Yeah, just very quickly, obviously I recognise in the budget that we've got in the papers tonight there is £150,000 in there, which clearly relates to the £150,000 that officers have said we need extra on top of that £1.5 million which we agreed as part of the capital programme. What I'm saying is I don't understand how we've saved any time whatsoever and why we've skipped out a step when we could have had a recommendation from the working party to this committee tonight for us to discuss, to decide the way forward, and officers could lay out what they wanted and what we needed to do to bring the project to fruition. We could have had a debate about whether that was the right thing to do, but it seems to me that if there is the willingness amongst members of the council to proceed with this project, that no one would have anything to fear from bringing it to committee or to council for a decision to be taken. But as things stand at the moment, and I recognise no money's been spent, the plan clearly is to spend some money in the future. We have already spent a significant amount of money with a line 4 or 5 years ago on a report that unfortunately I think members of different political groups all agree did not bring us forward, didn't give us the answers that we wanted. And it sounds as if a line are doing some pro bono work for us with a view to then us appointing them as the contractor. But clearly, I just feel as if we should have had a decision taken at this level, and I wanted to make clear on public record that myself and the Conservative group are not happy with the decision-making process around this. Doesn't mean that we're not happy necessarily with appointing consultants. We'd have a debate about that, but we're not happy with the way that decisions have been taken on this issue and other financial issues as well. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Duncan, for your comments. Hindsight's a great thing, but that meeting has now happened and passed, and I'm sure if a recommendation had been in the minutes, it would have come to this committee, but we are where we are now. And I don't feel personally as long as it's within the council's legal remit for me to make that decision as Chair of Policy and Resources within the financial boundaries that there are, that should be a problem for members when members of all political groups sit on that working party. So anyway, thank you. Let's move on. So we note those minutes because there was no decision on there. Item 7, urgent business. I have one item of urgent business, which if you'll bear with me a minute, I will just find. This is an item that I'm just going to ask committee for their agreement to this process happening. So the government has announced an additional relief fund known as CARF, C-A-R-F, of 1.5 billion, which has been issued to local authorities in December, 15th of December, which will be available to support those businesses that have been affected by the COVID pandemic but are ineligible for the existing grant schemes that are linked to business rates. So that money has been allocated to local authorities, and Ryedale has received just over £1 million as part of that process. So what we're asking you, if it's possible to do this evening as a committee, is to agree that a report on this new scheme will go straight to full council and won't come off through this committee, simply because of timing. Yes, that grant was announced in mid-December, but our officers have been incredibly busy dealing with the other the business grants from COVID, and also you'll be aware that there's been test and trace, self-isolation payments to deal with, and during January we've had just over 200 applications to that process, which was double what we had last month, and also preparing for the end of year billing, for the council tax billing, the end of year process, which takes a massive amount of time, and that has to be done by the end of this month. So what I'd like to propose is that the committee will agree that a report on this grant scheme, this CARF grant scheme, and how we're going to administer it through the council be taken directly to full council on the 3rd of March to allow the relief of the award and it to be accounted for, because we need to account it by the end of for it by the end of the financial year. So if we were to wait and put it through the next P&R, we would miss that deadline for the end of the financial year. So it's a simple ask, it's a process, it's not ideal. If it hadn't have come over the Christmas period and we weren't in the midst of a pandemic and the end of year processes, it would have come through the normal process, but that hasn't been possible due to timing. So do members have any views on that? If not, I would like to propose that we do that, we take that process forward. Councillor Duncan?
Thank you, Chairman. I think, first of all, I'd just say, I think that report could have been here for committee this evening. I think there's two distinct roles, isn't there? There's developing the policy, which is for one set of officers to do. There's another role, which is for making sure that we're releasing the funding. I take on board the comments that there's a lot of administration work involved, but I do think it could have been here, given that it was announced on the 15th of December. That being said, what question I had, and I don't know if the monitoring officer might be able to give a view, but it's my understanding that any officer can take a report directly to council and not to the relevant committee if they perceive it's in the best, that's the best way forward to do that. So I'm not sure we even necessarily need to make a decision on it. I'm not opposed to it. It can go straight to council, but my understanding is that it is an officer's ability to do that if they think that's the best way forward for something, to take it straight to council rather than to committee, even if it's in the committee's remit to decide it alone without council input.
Thank you, Councillor Duncan. I think you probably are correct in that. I'm going to go to Elizabeth in a moment, but I think it was partly just to inform this committee, because obviously this has come to us and we need to deal with it. But so I think it was Elizabeth's view that we should be informing members of it. But I'll pass over to Elizabeth if you'd like to comment, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, thank you, Councillor Duncan. Yes, you are quite right. An officer, it is within their remit to do this. However, because this matter came in on the 15th of December and there was a delay for all the reasons that the Chair has said, it would just have been prudent and for transparency to advise committee as to why this was late, and that it's more appropriate for it to go straight to full council, which we could do anyway, but it was just more informative and just for clarity and transparency to advise councillors for the reasons and why officers haven't managed to do this earlier. So and waiting for the next P&R would be too late, so it was just for information only. Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. That's very helpful. Do we have any other comments? No? Okay, in that case, we agree, I think, hopefully by general affirmation, that this will go straight to full council. Thank you. Thank you, members. Okay, moving on to Part A items. Item 8, private sector housing financial assistance proposed policy revisions, and we've got Kim to present this report. Thanks, Kim. Pages 15 to 20.
Thanks, Chair.
We can hear them, but they can't hear us. Yeah. Oh, right, okay. Are we able to do something about that, guys? Yeah. Okay, thank you. Kim.
Right, so the purpose of this report is regarding the private sector financial assistance that we provide as a council. So that is our discretionary loans and grants that we have been providing since 2012 at Ryedale. So the reason for the report coming is we are seeking a revision just on the allocations on the capital budget that we've got. At the moment it is divided up into the different loans and grants, and we just want some flexibility to be able to spend that full allocation. So if we spend up on the property improvement loans, we want to be able to take it from the other heading. One of the other reasons to come back to members is to increase the values of the property improvement loans and landlord improvement loans and grants. This was agreed 10 years ago now, and the cost of materials and labour has gone up quite significantly.
And that is the feedback that we are getting back from, especially from some owners of properties, empty properties, trying to bring them back into use. It can be quite costly. So using feedback, we thought we'd come back to members to see if we could have an agreement to increase the amount available. And also to amend the current financial low income threshold for our Ryedale Energy Savers scheme. At the moment, the income threshold is at 21k, and we want to increase this to 30k, so that will then be in line with all the eco-flex funding from the government, which says your household income has to be a maximum of 30. So we're a little bit behind that, so we just want to bring that up to the amount that the government state. So the reason why I brought it back is it was members 10 years ago who agreed the eligibility on the Energy Savers scheme, so it needs to be a member decision if we're going to increase that. So the recommendations really from members that I'm asking is to approve the flexible approach to the use of the existing capital budget to ensure that the various loans and grants can be utilised more effectively, to approve the increase in the value of property improvement loans from 7.5k to 15k, and landlord improvement grants and landlord improvement loans to 20k from 15. A note for members is the landlord grants and loans are only 50% funded, so we do expect owners and landlords to find the other 50%. And to approve the increase in the level of the low income threshold from the 21 to 30k. And that's it really. Are there any questions?
Thank you, Kim. Members have any questions? Okay. No questions? Okay. Yeah, okay. So, shall we open that up for debate if members would like to comment? Silence. Okay. That looks like that's, oh, sorry, Councillor Potter, I didn't see you.
Sorry, too slow there. Yes, well, with a view to the way that inflation's going, the way that material costs are ramping up, the way that energy costs, as we well know, are going ballistic, tax rises, and the need for energy efficiency, which seems to not get too much of a mention. I think this is a splendid idea to make sure that we make the most of any grants that are available, and I shall certainly be supporting it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Potter. Anybody else? Okay, I heartily agree with this as well. I think we have a duty as a council to see that our property stock is maintained and improved, that it's fit for purpose for our residents. And the thing I particularly like about this is the flexibility that it's asking for. It's not necessarily about using more money. It's about using the money that we have in a more clever way. So that we're not having budget pots sitting in money and others that are empty. So I think it's an excellent idea and I wholeheartedly support it. So I'm happy to propose approval from the chair, if somebody would like to second that. Councillor Potter? Probably can do this by general affirmation by the looks of it, as nobody's commenting a great deal. Is everybody happy to pass this by general affirmation again? Yeah. Brilliant, thank you very much. Thank you, Kim, for your report. Okay, moving on to Part B items, which will be matters that we referred to Council. So item 9, the Revenue and Capital Budget Monitoring for Quarter 3. And this is on pages 21 to 30 while Anton gets settled. Thank you. Thank you, Anton.
Thank you, Chair. Let's get started. Okay, this is the Quarter 3 report on finances, so it takes us up to, 3/4 of the way through the financial year. We have been reporting a break-even, or rather a very small underspend on the revenue budget, and that is still our prediction for the end of for the full financial year. So I'm not going to go through great detail in here. The variances are very similar to what we reported at Q1 and Q2. Some overspend on employees, particularly within street scene, but we're also seeing some underspends in employees due to vacancies, and I think members are aware that we are starting to see people move for other jobs at the moment. In terms of the COVID impact, we set a budget of just under 800,000, which again I'll cover in the budget report. We're on track to spend within that. And then on the capital programme, again, no surprises from what we said at Q2. The capital programme of around about £12 million, we're predicting to spend around 6 million of that. Some of that is simply to do, if I use the livestock market as an example, obviously 1.5 million went into the capital programme. We're not going to spend very much or any of that, so that accounts for a quarter of the what we call slippage. The report does highlight that we are still seeing some uncertainty around COVID. Our assumption is that some of the direct costs around COVID will hopefully come to an end. So that's in terms of dealing with the pandemic. But we are still likely to see the financial longer-term effects of COVID, such as already been mentioned, the impact on interest rates, which they were dampened down. That's hit our investment income, for example. So I won't say any more than that, but it's a position statement really that we're on track to spend within budget on revenue.
Okay, thank you for that, Anton. Reassuring to know that we are on track. Do members have any questions for Anton? Councillor Duncan?
Thank you, Chairman. I've just got a few questions, Anton. I'll try and make them as succinct as I possibly can. The first one was on page 24. It mentions about the capital programme, livestock market development, of which consultants' fees of £100,000 is expected in 21-22. Obviously, you mentioned earlier in the meeting that no money's been spent yet, and also there was mention that we might not actually spend any money in this financial year. Clearly, it's anticipated that we might do that. We've also heard from the chairman of the committee that there isn't obviously a decision pending formally through committee or through council. So I was just wondering why we're anticipating spending 100k, which obviously is double the amount, which even if you accept there is a budget available, which I believe there isn't, but even if you did, that's still double the amount that the chairman of P&R could agree under the financial procedures.
Yeah, I think we've put that in potentially as what we think could be the scenario if we were to spend the money. So it's at this stage, as you say, we've not spent any money. We might spend some money. It's in there, I suppose, as a cautious estimate. But that's looking at purely financial consequence rather than the stuff that you discussed before.
Okay, thanks, Anton. It mentions in here on the capital programme again about the community facilities in Pickering. Obviously, there's a budget put aside of £200,000. It's mentioned in the forecast in here that we would spend that £200,000. I can't remember, and I'm happy to be corrected that as far as I'm aware, we haven't agreed any projects to commit that community facilities money towards. And I was just wondering what we anticipate spending the £200,000 on by the end of this financial year.
Again, it's an estimate at this stage. I think you're right, but Philip may want to come in and correct me. I think we have committed about £25,000 of that so far. But Philip, are you able to?
Yeah, certainly, Anton. What you were saying there is entirely correct. We've committed £25,000 towards the Hungate Centre in Pickering. With regard to the residual 175, Councillor Duncan, we're working on a scheme with Pickering CIC, and that will be subject to a further paper into this committee in due course. So you're right, we are certainly not going to spend 200k against that budget in this financial year.
Thanks for that.
Thank you.
Sorry, just two other quick questions. The other question I had, Anton, was there's obviously revenue and there's capital funding of, I think, 45 and 55 for COVID-secure workplace adjustments, including PPE. And I was just wondering how much of that 45 plus 55,000 has been spent on PPE.
I don't have the figure for PPE, but overall, the combined budgets of £100,000, we've spent about 50,000 of that. It wasn't just, those budgets weren't just for PPE, they were also for helping working at home, for example, and also various other adjustments that needed to be made to this building.
Thanks, Anton. Obviously, I know we've had a few discussions about this. Just for the benefit of other people, it's worth pointing out that of that, I think, roughly £55,000, most of that money, which we agreed as a committee and as council for COVID secure workplace adjustments, including PPE, actually the costs have been spent on things like IT equipment, desks, furniture, sofas, TVs, renaming of rooms, booking system for rooms. I believe that what we agreed as a committee, which is COVID secure workplace adjustments, including PPE, is not actually in reality reflects what's been spent. I wanted to just raise that as a concern around when we're allocating budgets, us making sure we're 100% certain what that expenditure might be, because I think as members we would have had more queries around that and we should have had more say on the expenditure of that money. My final question, Anton, was in relation to, just bear with me, find the relevant section. The obviously holding of democratic meetings, the budget was £25,000. We've spent 69, or we anticipate we're going to have spent £69,000, clearly significantly more than what we had budgeted for. I believe meetings of full council are costing in the region of £3,500, something like that. We obviously have the December 2nd full council meeting where I understand we had to still spend the £3,500 or an amount close to that to cover the costs. And I was just wondering if there was any proposal to try and stop that over expenditure from the 25 to the 69. There are now no legal restrictions whatsoever on people gathering in public buildings or inside buildings for any purpose, be that work or social activity. And it does seem to me to be a misuse of taxpayers' money to be spending £3,000 every single meeting on live streaming, which was only put into place as a result of the pandemic when we couldn't meet. We were meeting virtually and we had to stream so the public could have access.
Yeah, I think I'll leave it to colleagues in terms of the discussions that I know will be happening in terms of return to some kind of normality, particularly going forward. This is just simply reporting what we spent, and we have spent more, you're right, than we did envisage. But I think actually the pandemic went on a bit longer than we expected.
Yeah, I mean, my understanding is that despite the fact the government have removed virtually all the restrictions that were in place, whether you think that's wise or not is open to question your own personal views. But my understanding is that we are still being asked to have full council meetings at Norton Rooms for the time being. Yes, that's not ideal and there is a cost implication. I think the other thing that has been discussed, probably not at committee, but I know has been discussed, is that I think because there has been a lot of live streaming going on during the pandemic of meetings, that the public quite like that aspect of being able to see what we do as a council. So there may be discussions that need to be had about continue with live streaming even when we are back in Ryedale House.
Yeah, thanks for that, Di. I know obviously we do seek health and safety advice. We should pay attention to that. I would just note we have health and safety advice now saying to meet in the Milton Rooms. We had health and safety advice saying on December the 2nd we could proceed with our meeting, and it was decided by the chairman that we shouldn't proceed. I think we need to make sure if we are seeking advice on health and safety that we actually listen to it and that we abide by it. Thank you.
I do agree that we should be seeking that advice and we should continue to, and I don't think we are yet out of the woods with COVID. So I would be very keen that we do continue to seek that advice and that we stick with it. Thank you. Sorry, do we have any other questions for Anton? Lindsay?
Thanks, Anton. It's just regarding local reorganisation of local government. And I'm just wondering if you could just remind me how much we have actually spent on that, and if you're anticipating that we're going to incur any more costs, because obviously we're all aware of public money, and it's just how much local, reorganisation is actually costing the taxpayers.
We haven't, I think I say somewhere in the report that this doesn't take into account what we might spend. We are certainly starting to incur some spend, and a lot of it is, it's kind of indirect spend because it's people who work for the council who are being diverted onto undertaking LGR roles. We have discussed some backfilling. I don't think that's in place yet, unless any of my colleagues want to correct me. We'll probably come on to this in the budget report, where we're proposing setting aside £500,000 for this. The other thing to say is that we are all diligently recording our time that's being spent on LGR, so we'll be able to give you an accurate picture of that when it happens. But up to December, it was fairly minimal extra cost anyway. But at this stage, we're just not sure, I think is what I'm saying.
Thank you. Do you have any further questions for Anton? Okay, well, the report is just for noting, so if we have no other questions, does anybody want to enter into a debate about it? Or if not, we'll just note the report and move on. Okay. Oh, sorry, Councillor Potter, I keep missing you.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. So just a brief comment. I have mentioned this before, but I think only in briefings, and I just want to make sure that it's in the public domain. That I was pleased to hear Anton say that he's keeping very close eye and scrutinising very carefully the costs that are being incurred with LGR, because we've been assured yet again, I'm old enough to remember 1972, was it, when we were assured that there would be significant savings, and that didn't seem to be the case. So I just want to be assured that we know exactly how much is being spent, and it's absolutely transparent that what every authority is spending on this and will be spent into the future. So we have very clear view of what it's actually costing and whether or if there are any savings and how much those savings are. I think it's important that everybody knows exactly what's happening and it's not just covered up. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Potter. Anybody else? Okay, thank you. Thank you for that, Anton. Moving on to the next item, which again is yourself, Anton. Thank you. Item 10, the Ryedale's Financial Strategy 2022-23, and that's on pages 31 onwards, members.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'll take you through this, and apologies, because it will probably take me a good 5-10 minutes to, or probably nearer 10 minutes to go through this. It is a very big paper. It's a very important paper. It's something that we do every year. We've done it a little bit different in preparation this time round, but it's also quite different in the sense that it's the last budget that this council will set. The paper itself is the usual one you'll see at this time of year. It's building on the previous two papers that came to P&R, which always shows our financial strategy in development. Since it last came to the committee in November, we have had the provisional funding settlement. We've also prepared a budget based on discussions that we've had with members through the workshops, through other meetings, to come to what's in this paper. So as I mentioned that it is the final year. As I've said before, the budget for Ryedale District Council will be set, but we still have a key responsibility to do that and to monitor it through the final financial year. Again, as I've said previously, it sets out a medium-term financial strategy of 4 years. Clearly, Ryedale will not be there for the last 3 of those. But what we, like the other 7 councils in North Yorkshire, are producing this plan not least because it gives the new authority an indication of what the pressures are, what our priorities are, because in setting this budget, you will be signalling your priorities not just for the last year, but also continuing beyond that final year. It is still a responsibility. I think I've mentioned in the past, and certainly at the briefing last week, we have signed up, as all councils, to a local finance protocol. But even with that, we do believe that government will still issue what's called a Section 24 notice, which will have some stricter rules and limits in terms of what we can spend after we set the budget. So it's still your responsibility as members to set the budget for the final year. Nobody can change that. But anything that happens after that may need to go to the new council for consideration. That doesn't mean that the new council would stop things, but there will be probably categorisations and prioritisations of how that actually works in practice, and there will certainly be some financial limits. The other thing to say at this point is even things that are in the budget that are agreed this year, if we've not started spending money on them, and I'm thinking probably on some capital things, for example, then that will probably need to go through to the new council. I say probably because it's not set in stone yet. And again, that's not for the new council to stop it. It's more for the new council to take a view and also look at the impact on any kind of legacy, I suppose, financial legacy we're placing on the new council. So, in terms of the actual proposal and budget itself, just a reminder, this current financial year, as I just said, we are on track in the revenue budget. That's after we've used around about £1 million of, just under £1 million of reserves, of which the bulk of that, nearly 800,000, was COVID. But we also used an amount just to balance the budget, and that took us around about £1 million. The budget papers this time last year also showed a potential on a deficit in 22-23 of about £1.2 million. This paper shows, as I did last week, how that's changed, and it's not £1.2 million, it's now £1.9 million. And that's because additional proposals, some remaining ongoing costs of COVID, some other financial pressures we're seeing have been added in. A lot of those have been offset by a much better financial settlement than we were predicting this time last year, although there still is some uncertainty around that. But for all of this budget, as I say in the Section 25 report, sorry, I'm talking lots of sections here, but the Section 25 report is where I have to say and agree that it is a reasonable budget and it's based on reasonable estimates and assumptions. But I would stress some of these are still estimates and assumptions. So additional proposals have been added to the strategy since last year. Some of a lot of those offset by additional income, but that takes it from 1.2 to 1.9 million. Also, the budget is based on a council tax increase of £5 for a Band D property. We always have this issue at Ryedale. £5 is actually £4.90 because we have special expenses for 3 parish councils that take the first 10 pence of any £5 effectively. So a £4.90 increase to Band D. I'm not going to go through all of the individual additions that have been put into the paper and addition proposals. My colleagues on the call and in the room are able to help out as well with some of those should you have questions. But they're split over 4 areas. The first one, the council plan priorities, picking up the discussions that we had over the autumn. Additional costs of COVID, 221,000 compared with 787 this year. And actually, the bulk of that, the largest part of that, is to do with lost investment income, because that's picking up in comparison with what we thought would happen with investment income 2 years ago. So lost investment income is the bulk of that. We've seen it's been referred to tonight that interest rates are steadily going up, but they're still lower than what we thought they would be, and the economy is still depressed from where we thought it would be as well. Some other costs that we've added in that weren't necessarily part of the prioritisation discussion we had before Christmas, but the biggest one of those is the £500,000 for LGR, which we've talked about previously. And then there is just general inflation. The inflation one is one we've put in an estimate, but we all have anxieties about that. Inflation is very high and will get higher over the next year. What I've also done is then set aside a contingency of £200,000 within that figure that we'll be able to call on. That £200,000 isn't set there necessarily for individual new projects. It's a contingency to top up any overspending on any budgets that you agree, really. There are some savings in there, £82,000 in total, but those are really, apart from the pensions one, which is a funny one, it's not something we have to do. It's just because we got a bit of a bonus on the pension fund actuarial valuation a couple of years ago, but we're using the bonus to offset what we know will be a rainy day in future. There are some increases to income that will help in a small way, but as they say, every little helps. So it is 1.9 million with a continuing gap, which frankly we will be handing over to the new council. As said last week, we're not alone in that. Most of the other councils have published their budget proposals, and most of them are showing budget gaps next year and over the next 3 years, which they're handing over, including the county council, much bigger figures. Again, as I've said before, that the point there is that, as has also been referenced, LGR should bring about some efficiency. So the efficiencies that will be passed up, that will be needed because councils as a whole are passing on an ongoing deficit, will be met through LGR or some other transformation. Nearly done. The capital budget has increased also by an extra just over £600,000. It's already been referred to. 150 of that's the livestock market. A couple of other areas just to highlight in here. There is provision of £152,000 for Norton flood defences. I've probably got that wrong, but I think that's what it's right, which is a later paper in this agenda. So it's subject to that, clearly, subject to agreement on that, and of course the full council. Then there's another figure of 160,000 additional requests from the Milton Rooms Committee. That's in there because we are expecting a paper to come to this committee in March to identify that and go through that request. So it's in there, but if that request is not agreed, it would come out and slip back into reserves. Overall, that leaves us with a position at the end of Ryedale Council of reserves of about 5.4 million compared with the 16 million we had last year, because we are spending some of it on balancing the budget, but the majority of it is through the capital programme. 5.4 million we'd be handing over, and a budget gap. The 5.4 million, however, also, as well as handing that over, we'll also be handing over a commitment of some magnitude, potentially, if that's what's agreed, for funding some of the capital projects, including the livestock market. What I mean by that very simply is, although 1.5 million is in the budget and there's a request for another 150,000 to go in, we do not believe that very much of that will be spent, subject to all the discussions about consultants and so on, but the actual building cost will not be spent, not be required until after April 23, i.e. after Ryedale no longer exists. So we're handing over 5.4 million, but we're saying, but you need to use 1.5 million-ish of that for the livestock market, subject to what I've said earlier about financial protocols and Section 24 notices and so on. So in summary, as a Section 151 officer, I'm saying in the statement that I have to legally produce on my own. I'm not allowed to talk to anyone when I do it, and I don't. What I'm saying is that this budget is reasonable. It wouldn't lead to me issuing any kind of notice to say that the whole thing's wrong. But we are handing over a problem to the new council to solve, and you need to be aware of that as members. And although we have enough reserves to balance the budget and fund what we've put in the capital programme, we're probably not handing over, if we spend everything as we do, we're probably not handing over enough funding to cover 2 or 3 years of deficit that we hand over to the new council, so they'll have to act pretty quickly. I will stop now. I'm sure there'll be more discussion and questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Anton. Very comprehensive as ever, and thank you very much for pulling together what is a really sizable piece of work, and especially around the ongoing pressures of COVID and the uncertainties around LGR. It's an amazing piece of work that you've actually managed to produce it at all. So thank you for that. Members, questions for Anton? Councillor Duncan?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I've got just a couple of questions, Anton. I'll try and keep them as succinct as I can. Obviously, just to reiterate, I think what you've said, we've got a budget shortfall in revenue terms over the next 3 years of somewhere between, I think, 1.7 and 1.9 million pounds every single year. The anticipation is we'd have roughly £5 million left by the end of this year, but clearly out of that amount of money for the next couple of years, the services that Ryedale currently delivers, which we're still going to have to deliver, areas like housing and planning and environment services, those areas are still, basically our total revenue spend on those things is operating at a deficit level. And that means that while I think we, as some people on the council, are saying, you know, we need to make sure that we spend all of our reserves and don't hand over, clearly if we don't have any reserves to plug that shortfall, I'm right in thinking, Anton, that for the services which Ryedale is still going to have to deliver, even after 2022 and 2023, that the new council is going to have to make some pretty tough decisions, I would imagine, to ensure that those areas are brought into non-deficit positions. And I suppose my question really is, for the new authority, that is going to require quite tough decisions for them to take. And therefore, are we at risk of actually, by not ensuring a balanced revenue position this year and future years, of actually our services being left to the mercy of a new authority, which we don't know who's going to be on that and who's going to control it, where there might be tough decisions affecting services which are delivered in Ryedale, given that we don't have the resources to keep funding that deficit.
Yeah, thank you. So just on the first part on the reserves, yeah, you're right. Those are roughly the figures. And I would always say that we need to keep back a minimum of £1 million just in case something happens and, you know, we have no money and we have to go to the bank asking for an overdraft. We're not going to be in that position. And also 700,000 roughly is earmarked for the pension fund. So it starts to reduce that 5.4, but it makes the point you're making more acute, I think. Yeah, we are, and we're not unique in this. We are handing over to the new council a budget deficit. The balance will be between how much of it are tough decisions and how much are at sort of less tough efficiency savings that can be made by coming together. We have been, well, you've been told that LGR will bring some efficiencies. That does mean, however, that we spend less money, and that has an impact on people. But yeah, you're right. I'm not trying to hide that. We are handing over a budget gap that the new council will have to deal with.
Thanks, Anton. Yeah, I just think we need to be very careful as members. I think we have a duty to ensure that we're not setting our services which we deliver up for potentially ruthless cutbacks or potentially extreme changes or reduced service to our residents. And therefore, I think we do need to make sure that where possible, we keep that deficit to a minimum, and that also we do have sufficient reserves to ensure that, at least in the first few years of the new council, that there is money that they can draw on rather than perhaps knee-jerk restructurings. I understand we need to make savings. I get that. That is the purpose of doing, one of the purposes of doing the reorganisation. But I just think we need to make sure that we aren't just focusing on the capital programmes. We're actually looking after our revenue position and the services which people need on a day-to-day basis. My next question, Anton, was, is it normal practice... on the livestock market, which you mentioned, you are, if I understand you correctly, we could potentially spend £100,000 on consultancy work. We won't actually be at a stage in the next financial year to begin construction phase of that project. We might have to have the agreement or sign-off from the new authority, and there is a chance, if I understand you correctly, Anton, that we could potentially spend £100,000 or more on consultancy, and the new council could, in theory, I'm not saying that they would, but they could, in theory, say you are not allowed to proceed with this project given the capital implications of it, and therefore that money of the £100,000 consultancy could be wasted, that all the preparation work that we've done as a council could potentially not come to fruition.
Yeah, I think on the question you asked, could the new council stop it at a certain point? Then the answer is probably yes, but it would depend on how far we'd committed to it. So if we'd not spent any money, not gone, even appointed a contractor, etc., that's more likely. But as you say, that's assuming the new council took that decision, and none of us can predict that.
Thanks, Anton. My next question is it normal practice for us to include in a budget a figure, in this case £160,000, when all we've received, I understand, is a request for funding? So we haven't received details of the business case, it hasn't come to committee, it hasn't gone to council. Would it be normal practice, usually, to include in the budget a figure like £160,000? Obviously, I'm referencing the Milton rooms here. We have agreed so far £500,000 on top of roughly £200,000 that we already committed for condition works to the building, which we're responsible to as leaseholder. My question is, why is that in there, that 160, when actually we need to consider that as members? I recognise it's coming to committee as a proposal, but it just seems a bit premature to have included it already in our expectations of expenditure for the next financial year.
Yeah, I mean, as you say, it will come to committee, and if it's rejected, then it will come out there. Whether it's normal or not, we do have a precedent. We did it last year with with the livestock market, for example, at a much higher rate, and councils will do that where they have a view that give the budget's meant to set a true position of what we think we will or might spend next year. So that's my reason that I think it's okay to be included.
I recognise that, Anton. Obviously, the 1.5 million was as a motion at council level, not at this stage before the budget's been produced. So obviously, there's potentially some people thinking this money is definitely going to be agreed. My final question is this. I'm just looking at the pay statement. Obviously, I know we were, I think, negotiating on 1.75% increase for staff wages. I was just wondering, there's two named roles here, and it appears to me that they have, as far as I can understand it, received a £20,000, between £10,000 and £20,000 increase in their salaries. That's not within the agreed pay, the 1.75%, that's outside of that. It's a new banding. And I was just wondering when that was agreed, by who, and why members have not been involved in something like that, which is between £10,000 and £20,000 increase in two senior officers' salaries.
Unless one of my colleagues can answer, I'll have to come back on that. I don't know the details around that. I don't know if anyone else on the call is able to talk about that.
Does anybody else on the call? Stacey, do you want to comment on that one, or shall we provide a written answer to Councillor Duncan? Thanks, Josie.
I'm just checking that you can see me.
Yes, we can.
Yes, you can. We will provide a written response to you, Councillor Duncan, outside of the meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. I do think it's quite important just to ask this, because clearly officers in areas like refuse collection, in housing and customer services have been given a 1.75% increase in their wages. And there's two officers here that's gone outside of that to quite a radical amount, between £10,000 and £20,000 from what I can work out. I think we do need an answer on this, and I think you as Chairman of P&R, I don't know if you've been informed of this at any point. I'd like to know that, Councillor Keel, if you've been consulted on this, but clearly something needs to be done about this, because this is not, I don't believe, to be democratic or transparent, particularly when those two roles, I believe, should be within the purview of the appointment of members, given that the Deputy Chief Executive Officer role is still vacant. So my question to you, Councillor Keel, is have you been involved in any of this? Have you been notified by the Chief Executive or anybody else about this arrangement?
Yes, I have, Councillor Duncan. Thank you. But I want to say that this discussion, as the Chief Executive has just said, outside of this meeting, as this is a public meeting, so we will come back to you on that. Thank you.
I understand that, Chairman. Obviously, it's a public meeting. It's a public document. The figures are in here. The roles are listed as is required by law. We have to publish this statement. And I want to know why two senior officers have been given a £10,000 to £20,000 pay rise in a single financial year. I don't think that's a reasonable question for a member to ask. And I have tried to get this information outside of committee, and it's not been provided to me so far. I think this needs to be, attention needs to be given on this, and I think it is actually a consequence, I believe, of bad financial management in this council.
Thank you for your comments, Councillor Duncan. We will get back to you about this matter outside of the meeting, as I've just said. Thank you. Members, does anybody else have any questions? Councillor Potter, questions for Anton?
Yes, thank you, Chair. At the risk of repeating myself, 6.4 on page 33, at the bottom it says, but LGR does also offer some greater opportunities for all councils in North Yorkshire in delivering financial savings. I would just want to ask, do we actually have the evidence of that, and has any budget been set in any way, or is this just sort of crystal ball aspirations?
Thank you. I mean, the easy answer is no. No budget has been set as yet. There's a lot of work working through what we need to do to get there. The statement is based on experience with other councils in the last 5 years in particular, and also on the business cases, or the cases that different councils within North Yorkshire put forward. Everyone put forward savings, so that's where it's come from. But I get the point you're making. The proof of the pudding will be in eating, so we'll see where we get to.
Yeah, thanks, Anton. Just another one that I suspect you might not be able to answer, but you've referred to pensions, and are you aware of whether, I mean, I think our pension pot is completely separate and somewhere with North Yorkshire, but are you aware of any of our pensions actually, or any of our money being invested in the oil and gas industry? Because if it is, we could possibly be in line for a massive windfall of dividends, because Shell have been paying out very nicely just on the basis of this, but of course it would probably cost us on the other side, because we'd be paying out an awful lot more.
I'm sorry to say I'm not a pensions expert. I'm an expert on the pension fund. I can find out. I know that the pension fund does produce that kind of information, so we'll see what we can do.
Lovely. Thanks, Anton. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Potter. Do we have any other questions for Anton? Okay. We'll open it up for debate then, members, for further comment. Anybody would like to make further comment? Councillor Duncan?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to point out, obviously previously we discussed the financial strategy and the way forward which we were going to take as a council. I know that several groups, the Conservative group wasn't one of those, met to agree some priorities collectively, the groups which are running the council. We chose not to take part in those discussions, but we did issue to Anton a series of principles which we felt the budget should be based on. One was a balanced or surplus revenue position. The other was a commercial approach with discretionary services review to identify opportunities to deliver value for money. Another was no increase in council tax for 22-23. The other was that frontline services be prioritised for additional capacity if required, with funding for that being identified firstly from savings in other less essential staffing areas or by redeployment of existing staff, i.e. not additional capacity being provided. The second was that capital projects are only included in the budget if there is an existing decision of council or an essential need has been identified. Actual expenditure of that money from those allocated budgets spent only after further committee/council decision at each relevant stage. That new capital projects to be included mid-year following a council decision. This should be following receipt of an officer report containing a satisfactory business case, and also that a prudent minimum reserve is maintained at all times. Now most, not all of those, but most of the principles which we laid out as a Conservative group are not complied with by the budget that's been put forward. Given that, and given the fact that the basic principles which we put forward are not represented in the budget, we are not able to support the budget that's been put forward. We understand that other groups are focused on the projects they want to spend money on. We tried to look at the principles and said the budget should be built on those principles. I don't think it would be useful, and I don't think popular with fellow committee members, if we were to go through every single line of this budget and propose amendments, changes, deletions, additions. We feel that fundamentally this budget does not reflect the principles which it should reflect, and therefore we won't support it. I've mentioned a couple of things in my questions which we are deeply uncomfortable and happy with. The spending of money on projects which do not reflect, we believe, the budget headings. The spending of money on 2 substantial increases for 2 members of staff. The expenditure on money on additional projects where there has not been a business case put forward so far. We've seen one project where there's been a request from an outside organisation and there's already £160,000 put forward into the budget. And we think for all of these reasons that actually keeping tight fiscal control, that's all gone out the window. We don't feel this budget actually serves what we think it should, which is making sure that the services we provide right now are in as strong a position as they possibly can be, ensuring that staff that are delivering frontline services day in, day out, who are very stretched, have the resources and capacity that they need. It seems to us that there's a series of pet projects, capital and revenue that have been identified. We feel that that does not actually look at the serious problems which we're facing as a council. So we can't support and we won't support. I also wanted to say about council tax. Clearly, we have proposed as a Conservative group every year since the elections in 2019 that the council tax be frozen. We've been outvoted on that every single year. I don't know quite what might happen this year, but clearly we believe that council tax should be frozen, and we don't believe that there is any need for there to be an increase given the fact we're facing reorganisation. That again is not reflected in this budget, so we can't support it, and we don't want to be associated in any way with the budget and the financial, the way that financial management is taking place now within the council. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you for your lengthy comments, Councillor Duncan. I have to say, and I've said this in this committee before, it would have been very helpful if you had put those comments to other group leaders and and taken part in the discussion that took place. You and your group, well, some members of your group took part in the discussions, but you didn't. And to suddenly drop those comments in at this meeting, helpful to know how you're feeling and helpful to know your views, but it is not helpful to drop this in at this late stage in the budget process. It doesn't help Anton and it doesn't help other members. And I don't think it helps the budget setting process. But thank you for your comments, and we will see what discussions take place at full council when we discuss the final budget.
I just wanted to say, sorry, Chairman,
can I just finish what I'm saying, please? With regards to items that are in that budget that we haven't seen a report for, Anton has already explained that if this committee and full council decides it doesn't want to support whatever those projects are that are in there, then that will come out of the budget. Similarly, I've had a conversation with Anton about if other things were to go in at a slightly later stage, that could happen if it followed the proper process and went through a committee process and had a sound, robust argument to put them in. Thank you for your comments, but I just think they're a little late.
There was just one thing I needed to clarify, which is the principles that I mentioned that I was reading from an email that I sent to Anton on the 20th of December. So they were fed in to Anton from the Conservative group at that point. And I did say to Anton that we recognised that the Conservative group doesn't lead the council. Therefore, he had to listen to the groups that do lead the council and give greater sort of recognition of your points. But we did nonetheless put those in. We are not just putting them out at this stage. We have played a constructive role, we feel, in putting forward what we believe to be the principles. The second thing I do just need to stress is we didn't take part in unofficial, informal group leader discussions outside of the council building where there was a horse trading agreement go on with regards to projects which each group wanted, because all we've ended up is with a massive bill, and that doesn't serve anybody. We didn't want to be part of that, and we aren't going to be part of that moving forward, but nonetheless, we will state our case, and we will put forward the principles which we believe in. Thank you, Chairman.
Just in response to that, thank you for saying you sent that to Anton before Christmas. It would also have been helpful to send it to me as Chair of Policy and Resources. And I resent the comment about horse trading. I think it's actually quite helpful for group leaders to get together and have informal discussions, and I think the other group leaders will agree that it is a useful exercise. Doesn't mean to say we are making decisions outside of this council building. It is just a helpful way of having a conversation. And I say again, Councillor Duncan, when you first became leader of the council some years ago, you talked a lot about collaboration. Thank you. Does anybody else have any questions for Councillor Potter?
Have we moved on from questions? Yeah,
Sorry.
right,
Yeah.
okay. Yeah, thank you, Chair. Well, there's some interesting stuff there. I suppose first things first, I actually found it very useful, beneficial to have those informal talks as group leaders, and it would have been helpful and beneficial to have all groups there with all views. I always find it's interesting to listen to all sides of the argument, preferably not at the last minute and after the budget's already been drawn up. Regarding the potential rise in council tax, we're only talking about 2%, and unfortunately inflation's already running way above that. So we'd already be falling back quite considerably. I noticed it says, should members agree a lower figure, this will mean a further call on reserves. So Councillor Duncan would like to call further on reserves, perhaps. On top of that, I don't know where I read it, but of course I've asked the question before to confirm that if we freeze the council tax this year, that base carries on in every subsequent year. So we lose 109,000 this year, and we lose that in every subsequent year. That will, of course, pass on to the new authority. Councillor Duncan just said not too long ago, we need to keep that deficit to a minimum. I presume he's aware that the North Yorkshire County Council, or North Yorkshire Council as it will be, will have a projected £30 million shortfall in a mere 3 years. I presume he should do because he's a member, but what he's proposing will knowingly increase that. Now, why would that be? Is that sound fiscal management, as Councillor Ives used to tell us at every meeting, or perhaps it's just pre-election political gain? I don't know. What else have we got here? Oh yeah, moving on from that. Yes, I'm rather concerned about the inflation rates, which could have quite an impact on the budget. But moving to page 49, employee costs, where the single largest cost to the council is its employees. And it says over the past few years, staffing levels have increased to ensure that the council had the capacity to function effectively and efficiently. Now, I couldn't help but notice that round about 2018, full-time employees had dropped to 142.9, and we're now significantly up on that, 202.8. So if that's the case, how come we were functioning effectively and efficiently with the figures that IEASY, I can't really say imposed on this council, but the figures that we spent a great deal of money to IEASY to tell us what to butcher our staffing levels to. I merely comment that the levels have moved up quite considerably, and if we're looking to make sensible savings, then we really ought to be very, very careful about the number of employees that we have, bearing in mind that some of them are under a great deal of strain with local government reform. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Potter. Do we have any further comments from any members? Oh, sorry, Councillor Bow.
Yeah, so first of all, I think that we've all got to remember how we're in this situation. LGR has put us in this situation, and this is why we're in the problems that we've got. This council is spending an enormous amount of money on LGR, but we are told that it's going to be so fantastic and we're going to make so many savings. However, the Conservative North Yorkshire County Council have got a £30 million deficit, and cuts will be made through no fault of our own. We have been told by Anton that each and every council are having the exact same issues and problems that we are having, and it hasn't been easy for any council, whatever political persuasion that is. Having said that, the elections are coming, and I suppose we expect that electioneering starts, and we have heard that tonight. Now, we hear that an email was sent tonight, and I've never seen an email of other councillors' priorities, and it would have been really nice and really helpful if I could have had a look at that. And when we had a leader, we were always told that we should collaborate. And I guess that what this council was trying to do was to get everybody's views together so that we could agree on certain things. But unfortunately, one particular group who aren't running the council didn't want to take part. And as we've seen, it's the easiest thing to trash something when you're not in charge, and that's obviously something that is happening. But the thing that worries me is that if we hand over the £5 million, that's up to the new authority what they decide to do. And our services at the moment have not been affected. Our services are really good, they're really strong. And we are in this situation because of the government wanting to give us the reforms that are going to save millions and millions of pounds. But the public are getting a little bit fed up of being told about certain things that are going to happen and that they don't happen, and it's just words. So we've got a deficit already of a Conservative controlled authority of North York County Council, and we've got 6 other councillors in exactly the same situation. So it would have been helpful if we could have got together and if we could have spoken about it, but obviously some members didn't want to do that, and now it's like the trashing time. But the public have got used to that. And I think that we just have to move forward, because it's quite apparent that we're never going to agree. So we just have to accept that the Conservative Party don't want to play any part at all, and they will not be supporting this budget.
Thank you, Councillor Burr. Any further comments? No? Okay. In that case, the recommendations are on page 31. Point 2, little 1 through to 6. So I will move those recommendations from the chair. Can I have a seconder, please?
I'll second those.
Thank you, Councillor Burr.
Can I request that the recorded vote, I don't know if that's normal procedure until this stage, I know it is at council, but if that was automatic or not.
I think it's automatically recorded anyway through an electronic process, Councillor Duncan. Yeah. All those in favour, please show. Okay, those against? Thank you, members.
That's 6 votes for and 4 votes against, Chair.
Thank you. That is carried. Moving on, item 11. Sorry, Anton, you haven't got away yet. Sorry, Anton, I thought we got through all yours this evening, but no. Item 11, the Treasury Management Strategy Statement and Annual Investment Strategy, page 131 onwards.
Thank you. Saved the best one to last. So,
thank you.
Treasury Management Strategy. This is our proposed strategy for the next financial year. It went to overview and scrutiny 2 weeks ago. Was that 2 weeks ago? Yes, I think so, yeah. And went through that committee. It will go on to council for formal approval. Like the budget, this will be the last year that we set a Treasury Management Strategy, but we still have to do it. There is no significant real change from our current strategy. We keep everything under review. The couple of things to point out. The figures that are in it are still draft. Some of the figures within that do depend on the final budget because one links to the other. So there may be some changes to those, just to alert you to that. And that's fairly normal at this time of year. As I've said earlier, the main thing to note on Treasury Management, inflation rates are very high compared with recent years. That is having an impact on interest rates. That does mean potentially that our investment income will recover a bit more than even I was talking about 20 minutes ago, which will be useful to us, although I appreciate it has an impact on the rest of the economy, which then has an impact on us as well. In terms of our borrowing, it's very minimal. It would have a negative impact on that. So it's just something we need to watch. I have said in the past, and I've joked, but half seriously, that if Treasury Management is interesting, then it's usually a problem. If it's exciting, then there's an issue. However, it will become a bit more interesting because of the kind of loosening up of the economy in various areas. But in terms of the strategy itself, nothing significant has changed in terms of what we're proposing for the final year of the council. Thank you.
Thank you, Anton. Do members have any questions for Anton? Councillor Potter?
Yes, Anton, is there it's probably a stupid question really, but is there any probability or possibility of any significant sort of increase on our investment returns, or is it just going to be fairly moderate?
I think for the next year it'll be fairly moderate. We all know that interest rates go up, borrowing rates go up more, and savings rates don't go up quite as much. So I think it will be fairly modest for the next financial year. It may take off after that. The other thing I should perhaps point out is that our investment income will also reduce as we use reserves, because obviously we've got quite a bit of money in the bank, and that's what's attracting income. But in terms of the rates, we are seeing a bit of movement there, but it would be nothing substantial. We're not going to plug the budget gap with it.
Sounds like the same old routine with the petrol prices that go up quickly and come down very slowly. Thank you, Anton.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions? This exceedingly complicated report. Okay. We open it up for debate. Anybody would like to debate? Make comment? No? Okay. Moving swiftly on then. The recommendations are at 7.2 on page 131. Points 1 to 10. I'm happy to move those from the chair. If I can have a seconder, please. Councillor Frank, thank you. Can we take this by general affirmation? Yeah? Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much, members. Brilliant. Thank you very much. And thank you, Anton. You've been sat in the hot seat for quite a while now, so thank you very much for your help with the meeting and all the endless work you're doing on our finances. Thank you very much. Okay, moving on, agenda item 12, report on the motion referred from Council on the Garden Waste Collection Service, pages 169 to 182, and Becky is presenting this report for us. Thank you, Becky.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Just give me 2 minutes to log myself on. Thank you. So yes, this report is dealing with a motion that was referred to Council in July, looking at exploring the scrapping of the annual fee for the garden waste service, looking at providing the service to all homes in Ryedale for free, and extending the time period that green waste is collected each year. So to start with, I'll look at the removing the annual licence fee and providing the service to all homes. Unfortunately, at the moment, the way that the service is operating, we're not currently in a position to offer a free garden waste service to all households now, as we would need additional vehicles, and the lead time for additional vehicles is 12 months. However, the likelihood is that the Environment Act will require waste collection authorities to provide free garden waste collections from 2023-24, and initial costs will be covered by new burdens funding. You may recall the DEFRA consultations last year concentrated around changes to a number of proposals around the delivery of the National Waste Management Plan, and at the moment we're not entirely sure when the outcome of these will be expected because there have been delays due to COVID. The report details a number of significant risks and equality impacts to consider by changing the pricing due to the inability to offer the garden waste service to all 26,000 households until new vehicles could be brought onto the fleet. We currently provide the service to 12,000 households. The options appraisal in Table 1 in section 6.9 summarises the financial impacts and the advantages and disadvantages of changing from the current operating model. And just to point out, that is based on the existing service only, and demand for the garden waste service, which could increase if we changed it, could not be extended to all 26,000 properties. Appendix 1 summarises the budget impacts for each option. And just to point out, at this present time, there is also concern around lack of capacity and time to deliver a significant service change, running in parallel with COVID and local government reorganisation, which we've heard this evening is now underway, and officers are working on developing strategic plans for transformed waste services, which includes garden waste collections. I'd just like to highlight a few key points from the report, which I hope does provide elected members with sufficient information on the position the Council currently is in regarding this service. The garden waste service is a discretionary service where fees and charges can be applied, where residents who produce garden waste pay. Licence sales have increased year on year for the past 5 years, demonstrating that residents are willing to pay for the service to enable garden waste to be recycled. The tonnages that we collect each year are subject to seasonal variations, and levels over the last 2 years have increased, which is likely down to the lockdown restrictions. The council's overall recycling performance has consistently been 48% since charging was introduced. Stopping charging for the service will add an additional financial pressure on the council to deliver a non-statutory service. And the aim is to provide an excellent service at a price which is consistent with charges made by other local authorities to those residents who produce garden waste. And currently in North Yorkshire, 6 out of the 7 district and borough councils do charge for the garden waste service. And the budgeted surplus does contribute to the net costs of other waste and recycling services, and also contributes towards balancing the council's revenue budget. So just moving to operating the service in winter, it would actually be possible to extend the garden waste collection service in winter with our current resources at an additional cost of £36,000. However, a carbon impact assessment does conclude that there are no additional environmental benefits from collecting in the non-growing season. So the recommendation in the report is to keep the existing service operational delivery model to ensure that any additional financial risk to the council is mitigated. And the recommendation is, as per the report, that we don't make any changes until we hear around, when the Environment Act is actually clear, and that the budget for 22-23 retains a current licence fee of £38. Thank you. I do, obviously, I'm happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Becky. We have questions for Becky? Councillor Andrews.
Thank you. Originally, when this was brought in, I seem to recall that it was to be done at cost anyway, but we have made money on the garden waste collection. So do you have a figure of what the cost would be if option 2 on page 173 to continue with the current resident subscription garden waste collection service at a reduced charge for an annual licence to operate the service on a cost recovery basis?
When the service was, the charge was first introduced, just to go to the first point, that was always the intention, to try and operate the service to ensure the costs were covered by the income. And every year that varies because of seasonal variations. Obviously, it's difficult to predict sometimes exactly how things are going to pan out. So every year is different. In terms of reducing the price, if we reduce the price, we would only be able to offer that to the existing customer base. We wouldn't be able to extend the service to all residents, which would give us an equality issue. But to answer your question, the actual reduction is the 121 surplus currently generated by reducing the price.
Thank you. Do we have any further questions for Becky? Councillor Potter?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Yeah, this business with the option 2, where you said it creates an equality impact as we can't offer the service to all residents. I presume that's just on the basis that reducing the price may increase the demand, and that would mean increasing the capacity. But what evidence have we got for that?
Well, it's very difficult to predict. So you're right, the options appraisal is looking at the current customer base. So we don't actually know what the change would be. But the issue we have is if that increased subscription does go up and attracts more demand. Our service currently operates based on 2 vehicles. So just to give you a bit of context, when we operated the service for all residents, which is what we previously did, we had 4 vehicles. So it pushes the capacity of the vehicles, which currently are pretty much at the peak of the season full. So it's very difficult to know. So the risk is, if we offer the service at a reduced price, how do we We don't know how many people would subscribe, but the risk is we might not be able to offer them the service, or we would have to then reschedule the rounds or put in extra days to collect, which all comes at a cost which we haven't gone into that level of detail because it's very difficult to know, but that is the risk around it, because when people subscribe, we open the window to subscribe. We can't just allow the current residents who subscribe to subscribe and not let other people subscribe. So it's just that opening that window is the risk that I'm trying to highlight here.
Thank you. Do we have any further questions? Councillor Duncan?
Thanks, Chairman. Becky, I think you're right in saying there is it about £36,000, did you say, was the cost of operating all year round, so extending the service?
Yes, to operate in December, January and February would cost an additional 36k.
So based on the assumption that if we kept the price the same at something like 8.38 as it is now, you would expect that might not generate any additional demand, because people who want to pay are probably already paying. You might have some people for the variations that you've mentioned wanting to subscribe this year but not previous year. But all things being equal, roughly, that £36,000 will be more than covered by the £121,000 surplus if we were to extend. And we do, I think you've said, we do have the staff and the vehicle capacity to actually extend beyond the current months for which we delivered the service.
If I'm understanding you right, yes, we could extend the service to operate over the December, January, February months. By doing that, there would be a shortfall in the revenue budget of that £36,000 as it currently stands, but that would be something we could do.
So the reason for discounting that option is not really a logistical thing, it's obviously a financial thing from that shortfall you mentioned, and also you mentioned environmental as well, around the additional obviously the additional vehicles on the road. Obviously that is an estimate, I understand that, but that's more environmental reason for discounting rather than a purely practical reason. Obviously I recognise that to introduce a free garden waste service within 12 months would be a massive logistical nightmare, but I feel that maybe extending the service, which I think would be popular, obviously that is more realistic by the sounds of it and could be done this financial year.
Yes, it could be done. The budget shortfall would be the issue. The other factor just to highlight is that we did previously operate the service all year, and the evidence was that the tonnage levels drop off substantially during that period of time. And so we're incurring a cost and miles to go around to collect not many bins. And when we reinstate the service in March, the anecdotal evidence is that the garden waste that's accumulated over the winter period is then collected in March. So whilst the service is operating, it's whether it actually benefits in terms of our performance and the cost and the environmental impact. So that's the consideration. And the decision that was taken previously was based around that evidence. And there's nothing to suggest that that's changed because tonnages have stayed the same. And we don't see evidence of, fly tipping of garden waste. We do believe that garden waste does end up composted.
Thank you, Becky. Any further questions? Okay, we'll open it up to debate then. Thank you for answering those, Becky. Councillor Duncan, as you proposed the original motion, do you want to speak, please?
Yeah, I'm happy just to give sort of background as to why this was put forward. Obviously, the motion was asking this committee to explore the options. It wasn't saying necessarily that we should do one thing or another, but it was simply to look at addressing two issues which we think are important and which we have heard mentioned by residents. The first is obviously the charge that they pay, and we feel it is unfair that people who do have gardens who do use this service are in effect subsidising other council services, that this service is raising a profit. It's not just covering the costs of delivering the service, which was originally the decision. Obviously, I do take on board the points that have been raised around variations and potentially it's difficult to predict each year what demand you might have. But we feel that it's fundamentally wrong that people who use this service are not just covering the costs of the service, but they are actually generating a profit for the council to then cover the costs of delivering services to other residents who don't subscribe to the service. The amount for that is obviously £121,000, which is quite a significant amount of money. The second issue is around the collections and the months in which the service operates. And there has been, anecdotally, I admit, feedback, which is that people would like to use this service beyond the months which it's currently offered. So we feel that these two things do need addressing, and that was why we wanted the council to look into the options. I recognise the government has consulted and is soon likely to enact legislation which would change current procedures and mandate us to do things which we might not currently do, or do things in a very different way. So I'm not proposing that radical action, for example, providing a totally free service at this point in time, although I would support that moving forward if the government decided to do that, and also to make a radically different amount of money that we charge for the service, reduction in the price. Again, that could open ourselves up to actually going the other way, and then it being a cost liability to the council. But I do think that there is something we can do, which is to operate the service for a longer period of time through the year. Obviously, the motion is going to go to council where it can be discussed and debated. But we strongly feel, as a Conservative group, that the current situation, whereby this is generating a profit, is not a fair situation, and also that it would be helpful and handy, I think, for residents to have this service running for longer in the year.
Thank you. Do we have further comments? Councillor Potter?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'm rather uncomfortable with the fact that this service was initially brought in with the idea of it being cost neutral, and the fact that we are actually making a profit on it doesn't sit too well, because it was brought in by the Tories when they were in power. But that's where we are at the moment, and I realise that government policy is that in future they will say you will do free garden waste collections, and I'm absolutely certain that they'll cover all the costs for that. This business of what demand there is in winter, and Councillor Duncan seems to think there is a demand, but our evidence, as we've been told, is that there isn't really a demand in winter, because there is so little garden waste, and I think it would be far preferable that people learned about home composting for the small amount of stuff that there is during that time. So, looking at the actual proposal that we have in front of us, the motion, and yet again I'm reminded of Councillor Ives and his oft-repeated mantra of sound fiscal management, and I'm looking at the cost of actually what would happen if we voted for this motion, and it would be almost £2 million to this council, which to me makes no sound fiscal sense whatsoever in our current position. So I can but wonder again what motives lie behind it. But quite simply, it's not practical, it's not affordable by any means at £2 million. And if the government want to insist on it in future years when North Yorkshire Council have taken charge, then so be it, they can make that decision. But absolute no-brainer that I won't be supporting this. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Potter. Do we have further comments? Councillor Arnold?
Thank you, Chair. I'm quite happy to support option 1. I think where we are is where we are. I compost all my waste. I don't pay for anything, although we do pay for one for our village hall grass. I think we've got a year left, and I think if the government wants to bring in free collections, let's have free collections. But I don't believe that collections in the winter is going to be affordable, and I don't think it's necessary.
Thank you. Councillor Frank?
Yeah, I agree with what Councillor Arnold's just said. I have a green waste bin, and I use it during summer, of course. It's always filled and emptied and what have you, but come December, you're not out gardening, and I don't know anybody, unless they're a bit bonkers, they don't cut their grass in December and January. I really don't see the point of trying to change a system that's working so well, and saying that you're going to do it free to all of Ryedale, and then you're going to have 2 new wagons, and where are you going to get your drivers from, and rah, rah, rah. I just think I think like Councillor Potter, this is a no-brainer, that we should leave it as it is, leave well alone, and leave it up to the new North Riding Council if they decide they want to give free garden waste, and it's if government say that they have to do that, and then they have to do it. But during the last year of this council's tenure, I just think this is bonkers.
Thank you. Do you have any further comments? Councillor Duncan?
Just briefly, just to clarify that for the benefit of other members of the committee, the proposal was, the motion that was put forward was never to do one particular course of action. It was to explore a number of different possibilities. That has happened, and we have an officer report in front of us. I take note of the recommendation to us as members. Councillor Potter had mentioned about the motivations behind the motion. He said to start with that he agreed that he was extremely uncomfortable with the fact we were generating a profit to the tune of £120,000, as are we as a Conservative group. That's the motivation behind the motion. He may be happy to say, I'm unhappy with this, I don't like it, but let's not do anything about it. We've said, we've recognised this problem, we've highlighted it at committee stage previously, and we've submitted a motion to actually look at what can be done. I am not saying that we should introduce this year, with a year left at the council, a totally free service. I'm not saying that at all. I don't think that is logistically possible, even if we were to decide to do it. What I am saying, though, is we still do have people paying more money than they need to deliver this service, generating a profit of £120,000. And myself and the Consultancy group aren't happy at this point in time to allow that to continue. We want to try and do something about it. And that's why I put the motion forward. And I think there's 2 real options. We either cut the charge that we pay, or we potentially extend the service, or a mixture of both. That's what we would like to see happen. And I hope that just clarifies our position.
Thank you, Councillor Duncan. Obviously, this will be going back to full council at some point, so the debate will no doubt continue on the subject. Oh, sorry, Councillor Andrews, I didn't see you.
Can I just ask, is presumably the year that you do the council collection, the green waste collection, will be the year after whether you know whether you've made a profit or not. So you're always 1 year behind. So this year is, if we did reduce it and when we do make a loss, how do we don't ever get that back? I know the council won't be here. What I'm trying to say is you can't come to us with a figure less than £38, an actual figure of what you could charge this year then, can you? If people,
we have moved on from questions,
yeah, sorry,
Becky,
yeah.
are you happy to answer that?
Yeah, just to clarify, the figures in the report are based on the current budget. At the moment, they're not based on next year's budget because we don't have that detail right now.
Chairman, I did actually ask this question prior to the meeting by Andrews. I don't actually have the answer, which is that we could reduce by £9.83. So that would be what we're charging £38 now. So £9.83 off that. That would get rid of that surplus. there obviously is the argument that if you charge a lower rate, you might then generate further demand, which might mean the service is not then totally washing its face. The other question I asked was around that figure of doing it for the full year, and that was the £36,000. Clearly, if we were to do it for 1 more month or 2 more months rather than the full year, then that will be a lower amount. I just feel as if we are recognising there's a problem. It seems everyone agrees that it's unfair that we're charging £120,000 over and above the cost of the service, but people seem to be quite quick to say, let's not do anything about it. Actually, it's something I think quite easy that we could do to try and right a wrong in the final year of the council. Obviously, beyond that, there's going to have to be one rate probably across the entire county, or there might be a totally free service if that's what the government decides. But I think there's something we can do this year. And also, if they're even if we do reduce by the amount and it doesn't wash its face, the profit we've generated in previous years up to the tune of between 120, 150, 170,000 pounds, more than will recover the cost that potentially might be. So I think we're just jumping to a conclusion where it's easier to do nothing, and actually I think we should do something.
Thank you. Do we have any further comments? No?
Yeah, just
Sorry, Councillor Andrews.
to do something is okay, but to do the wrong thing just for the sake of doing something, I think, as we've said before, collecting the garden waste over the 3 winter months, which is going to be environmentally wrong to do, is not a cure, not an answer to it. But I don't know what the answer is. I'm not saying we shouldn't do anything, but we shouldn't be doing that, I don't think, because I think that's just taking the workforce, using the lorries for, top of Rosedale for half a bin and back down is just ridiculous. So I don't know what their answer is, but maybe we can all come to something at the next full council, have some idea, but I don't think putting vans out for 3 months when they're not needed is the right answer.
The other thing that I would say, and we'll draw this to a close in a minute, is that you said you sort of got anecdotal evidence that people would like that extra 3 months, but I've also sort of taken some soundings since this came to, and I've got anecdotal evidence that people actually don't really mind paying for this service because they find it a very useful service if they don't have the capacity to do home composting. And also on top of that, I think, the council does a lot to encourage home composting, and we should be continuing with that. So I think, it's a bit of swings and roundabouts, but I certainly agree that I don't see why we would want to extend for those further 3 months. Most people are not out in their gardens at that time of the year, and as Councillor Arnold has said, do more composting if you are. So, thank you. I think we'll draw this to a close if everybody has had their say on what they'd like to comment on this. So you have the recommendation at 2 on the bottom of page 169. Can we have a proposer and a seconder for that? Councillor Arnold, were you indicating then? Oh, sorry, page 169. So. Oh. Little musical entertainment in the back there. Okay. So we have the recommendation on the page, bottom of page 169. Do we have a mover and a seconder on that, please? Thank you. Councillor Frank, do we have a seconder, please? Councillor Arnold, thank you. Right. Thank you.
Could I request a recorded vote, please, Chairman, on this one as well? Named vote.
You.
Thank you.
I think it is anyway. Councillor Duncan. Those in favour, please show. Thank you. Those against? Thank you.
That's 6 for and 4 against, Chair.
That will go back to full council in due course. Thank you. I Item 13, report on the motion referred from Council on the flood management contribution towards the Yorkshire Water Permanent Solution for Norton, which is on pages 183 to 86. Becky, this is another one for you. Thank you.
Thank you. So, yes, this report again deals with the motion referred from Council in February 21. And it followed it was actually during the significant flood event which occurred from December 2020 through to February 2021. And following that event, Yorkshire Water have commissioned an area study to survey the drainage systems in Malton and Norton. Members will also be aware that a flood management working party was established last year, and on the 16th of September, Yorkshire Water representatives actually attended this meeting and provided an update on other future actions and investment plans, one of them being another piece of work to install a permanent solution for Norton to improve the response to flooding affecting 517 properties in the area. The information that we currently have is that this scheme for Norton will cost an estimated £760,000, which is based on a full worst case scenario. And just to be clear that if there were to be an increased cost in this scheme, that would be at the risk of Yorkshire Water. And what the scheme would actually involve would be installing a permanent pump, which would operate automatically when water levels reached trigger levels, which currently, when trigger levels are reached, portable pumps are deployed, which takes time, which is obviously effective, but not as effective as a permanent pump. And the recommendation from the Flood Management Working Party on the 9th of December was to support an investment in this scheme. And this does concur with a council plan priority to reduce flood risk by investing in flood alleviation measures. And the recommendation in the report is actually to amend the motion, to delete the existing motion, actually to replace it with a very specific recommendation around a contribution for the scheme in Norton of 20% of the total scheme cost to a maximum of £152,000 based on the scheme cost of £760,000. And if approved, this funding would be allocated within the capital budget for 22-23. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Becky. Does anybody have any questions for Becky? Councillor Arnold?
It says there's a risk that Yorkshire Water will not go west this. How big is the risk, do you think?
It's difficult for me to say, but obviously we're working very closely with Yorkshire Water colleagues, and I think any financial contribution that the council may approve would seek to mitigate this risk. I can't. It's progressing through their internal procedures. It's going through the process. It's reached the next stage. They're now looking at feasibility and investigating design. So the indications are that this scheme is progressing, and a financial contribution, as I say, would seek to mitigate that risk.
Councillor Burr?
Yeah, thank you, Becky. I think that most councillors would recall that at a particular P&R meeting, councillors were really, really cross when they felt that Yorkshire Water weren't doing enough to help. But I personally, and I'd just like probably some thoughts from myself, I personally felt that over this last year or so, Yorkshire Water have been much more active and reactive and seemed as though they want to actually progress things. And I'm hoping, in answer to Councillor Arnold, that where we all said that we were very unhappy about Yorkshire Water, and we even were saying we need to write to them, etc., that I think that they have shifted. And I think that what I'm hearing at different meetings is that they're actually willing and wanting to help. So would you concur with what I'm thinking about Yorkshire Water in response to Councillor Arnold, that he said, well, how likely is this? do you think that you've seen a shift in their willingness to do things?
Yes, I have seen a shift, and I think, as I've said, there was always the promise of a study, which is underway, and for them to come and also talk about another piece of work which they'd already started is a sign that they're definitely wanting to see an improvement.
Yeah, I'd also like to comment on that. I've definitely, obviously, members will know that I've been involved in sort of the flooding situation in Morton and Norton and other areas for a long time. And for a long time, it was actually quite difficult to engage with Yorkshire Water and for them to take responsibility for what was happening. And in this last year particularly, there has been a definite change in mindset, that this problem we have in Norton keeps occurring, so happening far too often. And I think they've finally started to listen to what people are saying and have been very proactive, far more proactive than I've ever known them to be before. So thank you. Any further questions for Becky? Okay, so yeah, thank you, Becky.
Thank you.
We can open it up to debate. Councillor Mackenzie?
Thank you, Chair. I actually seconded this motion at the Flood Management Committee. I've seen firsthand the misery that some of this flooding causes. People with raw sewage floated about in their gardens is horrendous. And I would wholeheartedly ask people to support this motion. I think it is just so important that we do this for the residents of Norton. Well, we have the chance. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mackenzie. Councillor Potter?
Thank you, Chair. Right. First things first, I just want to raise the point that we've got in 4.2 under significant risks, where it says 517 properties in Norton are at risk of recurring flooding impacts. I'd just like to point out that that is recurring flooding plus sewage, and there's a big difference, because that once you've got sewage in that flood water, that is maximum impact on those flooded, the maximum time out of their properties and the maximum problems to clean them up. Now, at one of the flood management working parties, I asked Yorkshire Water what were the key issues around sewage flooding, and they sort of sat there quietly, very quietly, silently in fact, for long enough for me to say, well, I'll tell you what the key issues are then, because there are two. One is the amount of flood water, and the second is the capacity of combined sewers. So if you've got a lot of flood water, or you've got not enough capacity in the combined sewers, you've got a big problem, and that's when it keeps flooding out, which it does so on a regular basis to the same properties in the same places. Now, Yorkshire Water are very consistent in their lack of action on combined sewers, and there's a good reason for that, because it'll cost them a fortune. And they know that, and if they admit to it and start doing the odd one or two, it's the, I think we could say, the thin end of the wedge, because it will cost billions. So they prefer not to do that. But they are very keen to reduce surface water flows, so they're quite keen on looking at natural flood management methods upstream and so on. So, moving on to the recommendation, I couldn't have supported committing 2.5 million of our reserves, quite simply because we are not a flood risk management authority. We don't have the responsibility for it, we don't have the funds for it. That's down to the Environment Agency, to a lesser extent Yorkshire Water, North Yorkshire County Council, Lead Local Flood Authority and so on. However, I think this is an excellent recommendation that we replace that with this 20% contribution, because to my mind it is not a huge amount, but the benefits would be substantial by having that ability to pump the water much more effectively and efficiently when that happens. So effectively you are reducing the amount of the flood water in those two things that I said. It does nothing about the combined sewers, but it gets rid of that floodwater more effectively. Add to that the fact that if Yorkshire Water decide not to go ahead with this scheme, it's not going to cost us anything, and yet the offer is there for 20%. And if you'll pardon the pun, it's the ideal pump priming to make sure that Yorkshire Water don't slide out of any responsibilities. So I think this is absolutely ideal in every sense, and we'll certainly be supporting it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Potter. Do you have further comments from any members? Yeah. Oh, sorry, Councillor Bowe was next, yeah. Sorry, Lindsay.
I think I need to move, Chair. I would like to say that I really do hope that we have a unanimous support for this from all councillors. We are focusing on Norton, but actually this really does affect Moulton, and it really does affect the villages because of people travelling to and fro, and all the chaos that it causes. It is absolutely unbelievable. So it's not just really good for the environment, but obviously it's really good that we keep, the townsfolk moving and everything going well. So again, we have focused, and we've said about Norton, and rightly so, but it does affect many, many more people. So I hope that it's one vote that we can be unanimous on. Thank you.
Councillor Duncan?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. First of all, I think we would like to say that we do support this as a Conservative group. We recognise the issues that we've had with flooding, and that it's right that we contribute, I think, towards action on those issues. What I think I just need to make a point about, though, is that clearly the amount that we are contributing is £152,000. That's just under 7% of the amount that was called for in the motion, to great fanfare and publicity. And I think there might be some people who are potentially incredibly disappointed. I don't know, Councillor Keir, if you might be, that the amount that we've come away with from your motion is 7% of what you asked for. And also the total scheme cost is less than half of what was contained within the motion as well, which makes me think that the scheme that was mentioned or referred to in the motion is not the scheme which Yorkshire Water has indicated it might potentially at some point in the future provide funding towards. I think we are a long way off this scheme coming to fruition, even with the £152,000 which we are proposing. And just to reiterate again, it's significantly less than the 2.5 million which was called for by yourself, Councillor Keogh, in the motion.
Thank you for those comments, Councillor Duncan. At the time that the motion was put forward, Yorkshire Water hadn't actually come forward with a scheme. It was based on a report that was done some years ago on the approximate costs that would be needed to actually solve the problem with the sewers in Norton. So it was obviously a lot more than we're now being asked for as members, but I'm not prepared to comment any further on that. And a great fanfare seems to be a thing that a lot of people like to do in the papers, so I won't comment any further. I'm delighted that this is before you. I'm glad that the Flood Management Working Party supported this unanimously when we last met. It will make a huge difference to the people in Norton, the 517 properties that were at risk from flooding, and particularly for those ones, as Councillor Mackenzie's already said, that are at risk from flooding from sewers, because there is nothing more disgusting than flooding from sewers. And to see Norton, when it is suffering from that, and the devastation that it causes to property in the area is just appalling in this day and age. So I'm really pleased that Yorkshire Water has come to the table finally and is being very proactive and is working hard, I believe, to develop a scheme. And I think it's quite right. You beat me to it, prime pumping. This council has done it before. We did it with the Pride Park Beck pumping station. We did it with Pickering. Obviously, we supported the current Moulton and Norton flood alleviation scheme, which is just happening at the moment. It works out at about £294 per property, which I think is excellent value for those families that are affected in Norton. and along with Councillor Burr, I hope you will support this unanimously. So if anybody else has any comments, if not, I'd like to propose it from the chair that we support the recommendation. Seconded by Councillor Burr. Do we need to put this to a vote? Are we all going to go with general affirmation? Thank you very much, members. That's a great result, I believe, and obviously this one will now go back to full council as well with the previous report. So, and I think that brings us to the end of this evening's agenda. I have no other business that is urgent, so thank you very much indeed, members, for your attendance, and we will see you shortly at yet another meeting. Thank you very much. Safe journey home, everybody, and thank you.